Shock Absorber podcast. It is awesome to have you along with us. And as always, awesome to have some awesome guests. We're talking about arts, so we're bringing back the arts party.
I've made it back.
The arty farties. So Brayden, welcome.
Welcome to you.
Thank you. I like it when I get welcome back onto the podcast I host. The arts pastor at Soul Revival Church, welcome.
Yeah,
and Stu, back again. Great to see you. Very puffy Sharks jacket you've got on today. Is that warm?
Mm-hmm.
It's cold at the moment. We talked about weather in the last episode, but it's been very cold at the moment.
It is.
All right, we're going to talk about arts again. One of our service teams, as we call it, that encapsulates word ministry, tech ministry, and music ministry.
Yeah.
All those things together. And an opening question that you thought about, Brayden, was you mentioned Spotify, but is it what have you been listening to on Spotify?
Yeah, so we're talking about strategy today, and so a big part of our intentional strategy across all our service teams is an intergenerational approach. And so I think Stu could probably attest to this more, and Joel even a little bit more than me as well, is the way that we've consumed music has changed. I'm sure Stewie remembers buying records. And I'm sure you remember buying CDs.
Yep, very much so.
Which I caught the tail end of CDs. But the way that we consume music has changed a lot. And it means that rather than just being able to listen to whatever you physically have bought, instead now the way we consume music is intergenerational in a way, because you can kind of jump anywhere you want depending on how you're feeling.
You can listen to whatever you search.
Exactly. And also, like, rather than waiting on the radio to record and make a mixtape, you can kind of just make a playlist of whatever you want. Did you ever make a mixtape, Stu?
Yep.
Yeah, waiting for something to come on the radio?
Yep.
Did you ever call up and be like, can you play this song? No, you weren't that desperate.
I remember making a mixtape too.
Yeah.
And it sounded terrible because you got to get the timing right.
Yeah, yeah. Making a mixtape for Karen.
That was a CD.
Yeah,
I did,
burning a CD.
I did burn a CD.
Yeah.
I once burned a few CDs for some people.
Yeah.
And I said I'd put a lot of effort into it and found the album art and did the...
Oh, wow. This is high effort. It's not just writing on it.
Yeah. And I remember one of my friends going, this is so good. And he paid me more money for it.
Oh, wow.
And
You're charging.
I know. Well, I said like, give me $10 or something.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that if I probably hadn't been thinking this probably isn't a very good way of making money.
Yeah,
probably could have had a pretty thriving business going on in the what was that, the mid 2000s.
Yeah, but I thought it'd be interesting to chat about what have you been listening to this week, because now due to streaming we can listen to whatever's available rather than just being caught or stuck into whatever era or things that you've bought over time. You're kind of free to jump all over the place. So I'm interested to see what you guys have been listening to.
Unless they're not on the streaming service, which has been a thing too, hasn't it?
I'm glad Neil Young's back on Spotify.
Ah, yes, fair enough. Well, you go first, Brayden. What have you been listening to?
What have I been listening to this week? I've been jumping around a little bit. I've been listening to, specifically, Nashville Skyline album by Bob Dylan.
Okay.
Which is his 1969 album, which is quite different to his other albums because he sounds completely different. He doesn't really sound like Bob Dylan, and that is because he stopped smoking for an album.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Just for the album?
Yeah.
Was that intentional?
I don't know, but it was just a period. If you listen to that album, it doesn't sound like Bob Dylan singing. He's much less nasally, and it's an album he made in Nashville with Johnny Cash, and I've been really enjoying that album this week. It's very chill. I think it goes well with the autumn vibes that we're experiencing at the moment. It's very kind of like chill and warm sounding album, which I've been enjoying driving around to and listening to at the moment. Wow. Mostly that, and then a little bit of some more current things. But yeah, that's kind of been especially the last couple of days, has been that album, which was released in 1969. So quite a while ago. Wikipedia
tells me that the concept of recording a country album in Nashville was first discussed with Dylan and Johnny Cash together in 1965. Yeah. So it took him 4 years to get it going, but there you go.
Yeah.
Johnny said, I've got my own ideas about that Nashville sound. And I'd like to try it with Bob.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just after one of my favorite kind of musical things is the band, which is Robbie Robertson, Levon Helm.
Oh, the band called The Band. Is
The
that?
Band. And they're called The Band because they were Bob Dylan's band. And so this is just after that. And so that's kind of one of my favorite musical eras is the band stuff, The Last Waltz, music from Big Pink, and then, that Basement Tapes era of Bob Dylan. But, I've been enjoying Nashville Skyline this week.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Stu, what do you got on the playlist?
I just brought up my recently played on iTunes.
Yeah.
And I've been listening to REM Epirogenous, which is their I can never pronounce it correctly. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it's their compilation album from 1987. The earlier stuff.
Yeah.
And I've been listening to 60s Rock Essentials, Lenny Kravitz, Let It Ride remixes, part 1 and 2.
Okay.
Rio Grande, Mud, which is ZZ Top's first album.
Okay.
And then I listened to Joy by King's Kaleidoscope.
Oh.
Morning Glory by Citizens.
Yep.
Was getting into that. And went into Citizens Essentials. Bit of a tap back into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then The Pearl by Harold Budd and Brian Eno.
Yeah.
And then 2 more random ones. I've started getting into listening to music from Westerns.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm re-exploring 50s Westerns music.
Yeah.
So I listened to John Wayne and John Ford soundtracks, music of the Westerns.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And At the Movies with Dean Martin.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So I love
That's
a
a
bit of
good
Dean
mix,
Martin.
Dean Martin's, yeah.
What do they call his era when he was drunk all the time? They call it something.
The Rat Pack or like...
Yeah, it was the
Crooners?
Rat Pack. Yeah, they call it there's an American word for being drunk. It'll come to me. But anyway, this is part of his era of him. I don't think he actually was drunk. I think it was just his shtick.
Yeah.
I think he was just like, trying to be cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's just that like kind of cool era.
Yes,
Well,
like a cigarette and glasses.
Sinatra and that. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
I love that
like
sort of stuff, that croony sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I had that on when Lou came home from work and I served up dinner and she's like, "God, can we listen to something different?" I'm like, it's kind of thinking that was quite romantic.
Relaxing. It's a relaxing kind of music. You know what I mean?
It's super romantic.
But that's kind of the point. Is like you've been everywhere from Dean Martin to Lenny Kravitz, to Citizens.
Yeah,
Like,
that is cool.
yeah.
Whereas I don't listen to music like that. I will just listen to one band for a long time and then switch to another one. And
do yourself a favour, Dean Martin.
Okay.
You and your beautiful eyes.
oh, thank you.
I know a dream when I see one. With my eyes wide open, I'm dreaming. I feel something. No, I won't keep reading that one. I don't care if the sun. I can't even speak properly. I don't care if the sun don't shine because I have you.
And that's the one.
How romantic.
Is that what Lou wanted turned off?
Plate of food.
Beautiful.
Comes through the door.
Yeah.
Candlelight dinner. Candlelit dinner.
Candles were on.
Yeah.
Oh,
Elijah was at uni.
oh,
There's the dinner. She's
That's
like,
amore.
that's.
Can we listen
amore.
to Bear and Boy or something? Or
Boy and Bear?
Boy and Bear. Yeah, she likes that more than Dean Martin. So we listened to that and had a nice dinner.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. That's Amore was I remember my dad introduced that song to me.
I love that song.
And
That's Amore.
yeah, and then a while back, a friend of ours, Keegan, and I tried to introduce it as like a saying. That's pretty amore. Like,
How did you go with that, Joel?
it did.
Obviously, he's caught on because
Well, the time to do it is week away when we go
Yeah.
like
Okay.
week away, and then we were trying it a week away. It didn't really catch on, so unfortunately. But I like to have a saying that kind of encapsulates a period of time, but didn't work out that time. I think I'm going to try again this year.
yeah, go for it.
That's amore.
Break a leg, Joel.
We could watch the original Ocean's 11.
Yeah,
Oh,
Was that what it was called, Ocean's 11, the first one?
yeah.
I think so.
Because they just remade it, didn't they?
Yeah.
I think
the remake's really good.
The remake
Yeah.
is really good.
It's really good.
It's funny how Brad Pitt's always eating in every scene.
I love
Yeah.
Brad Pitt.
Yeah,
George
a very
Clooney and Brad
good-
Pitt are cool.
I know.
Cool
I
duo.
know. I know.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's almost like another Rat Pack, actually.
Yeah.
Which I think they tried to recapture with it.
yeah.
I've been listening to the Rolling Stones, in particular the period between 68 and 72, but the thing that I always do is listen to their live performances.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of videos on YouTube that are about that, and I've been listening to that. And then I remembered that one of my favorite bands, the Hives. The front man, Pele is very influenced by Mick Jagger.
Yeah.
And then I've been listening to the Hives.
But again, the Hives and the Strokes. Who do you reckon's better?
If you ask me, the Hives, I think Brayden will say
I
the
reckon the
Strokes.
Strokes. I prefer the Strokes.
I love the Strokes.
I reckon they nailed that New York sound,
Yeah.
That quintessential New York rock and roll.
I think the Strokes are probably one of the most influential bands of the 2000s. The Hives, I feel like, are a little bit later, but they're very different. They're very different.
They're
both
extremely different.
Oh, they're probably two of the bands that had the biggest influences on a lot of the bands that I was playing in.
What about Arctic Monkeys? Are they
Well, they
That's
started
another
off
one,
as a Strokes ripoff. Like they love.
Oh, really? Were the
Strokes.
Strokes pre?
Yeah, pre-Arctic Monkeys.
Didn't know that.
So like, those I would say a lot of the bands I really loved in high school were massively influenced by the Strokes.
That's probably true. Yeah, because the Strokes came out when I was in high school.
That first album was unreal.
That first album's so good. Yeah.
What was it called?
Is
it
This It?
self-titled? Oh, Is This It? That's right.
I saw them last year with Eth, and it was so good.
If they come back again, you'll have to tell me. I'll go.
Well, they hadn't toured in 10 years or something before that, but it was.
We're going to see the Hives though.
We are going to see the Hives
Yeah.
just after a week away.
Yes.
It's going to be really fun. I haven't seen them since 2013.
This will be the third time I've seen
Yeah.
them. Yeah, they're all a bit older and fatter now.
Yeah, that's what happens with most bands.
All the rock stars. Well, except for the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, they're so skinny.
Yeah.
And Ronnie Wood.
Yeah.
But that's the period I like is that 68 to 72 because that's when Mick Taylor was the second guitarist. So they've obviously so Brian Jones passed away and then Mick Taylor took his place. And Mick Taylor seems quite boring on stage, but his guitar playing is unreal. I think it's the best sound that the Rolling Stones have had. Anyway, it's amazing that they're still going.
Yeah. You Stones or Beatles?
Oh, I wouldn't even say I'm either or. I think I like the Stones a bit more because there's more blues influence. And my favourite band is Led Zeppelin, and they have a lot more blues influence as well. But it doesn't mean that the Beatles weren't influenced by that. But they were kind of just a little bit before that time, I think. It's interesting. The reason I'm listening to the Rolling Stones is because listening to The Rest is History, they did a 2-part series on the Rolling Stones. And they talked about how Mick Jagger was at the London School of Economics. So he was came from quite a well-off family. But they had to present themselves as working class as a juxtaposition to the Beatles, where Beatles came from a more working class background in Liverpool, but they were like prim and proper and looked more middle class. So I thought that was a really interesting comparison between the two, and especially how bands, especially at that time, had to present a certain image. Because you look at the early Stone stuff, they look like the Beatles. They were all wearing suits and nice cut hair, and then I think it's Andrew Loog Oldham, who was their manager, decided, no, you've got to make them like the anti-Beatles.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't invite this. Would you? There's like the ads is like, would you invite this guy around for dinner or something like that?
Yeah.
And a lot of bands have captured that.
But I guess the really cool thing and the reason why we started chatting about this is through the way that we consume music now, and we're able to jump around into so many different things. Is you're listening to music from the late 60s and 70s. I was listening to music from the 60s, and Stu's been listening to music from the 2000s, current music.
And the 50s.
The 50s, the 60s. And I'm in my 20s, you're in your 30s, Stu, you're in your 50s. And we're kind of all able to jump around and move through whatever we feel like listening to at that point.
And it kind of takes away that thing of like music represents the cultural moment of that time.
Yeah.
We're talking about like Dean Martin was that, a cigar and a whiskey. Then you've got the Beatles were a different thing. The Stones were an anti of that, but it was still representing like the 60s and how everyone was, it's the youthquake as we've called it before. And then it's fascinating.
I have this funny thing with music that when I'm writing, I need to listen to either Epirogenous or Brian Ferry or Dire Straits, because that's when I was in high school and early university. And when I was writing in university, I was listening to Epirogenous. when I was in my HSC, I was listening to Dire Straits. Something happens in my brain. Some people say I have undiagnosed ADHD. So I laughingly say music medicates my ADHD because I put it on and it's like I just go into this track.
Really?
My brain just starts focusing, and I'll focus for a couple of hours if I'm listening to those kind of music. So it's really weird.
And kind of capturing that thing of how music isn't just a thing that we listen to, there's more to it than that. And that's the discussion we had last week too, is like the spiritual element of music and how that can influence our emotions and things like that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're talking about strategy of arts.
Yeah.
Brayden, you're the arts pastor. It's important, as we've talked about many times before, about our ministry framework and how our theology dictates our strategy and our strategy dictates our practice. And we do that across the whole Church of Soul Revival. Though an opening question you thought about when we were planning this was, why, and it relates to how we're doing strategy, is that why do we only have volunteers that play music, for example, and not paid musicians? And that was the question you wanted to start with. So why did you want to start with that?
I think it's an interesting concept for what we're striving for. And I don't know if you've talked about hospitality yet in this series, but you've talked about hospitality previously in the Shock Absorber. And it's the same kind of idea. Why don't we just pay caterers?
Yeah.
We have meals at all our services. We have music at all our at most of our services. Why don't we just pay caterers to do that? And likewise, why don't we just pay musicians to provide us that service?
Yeah, professionals, right.
And I think that's a big, that's something that's very big in the US, is paying professional musicians to do that and play that role. And I think obviously there's like monetary and budget things behind that as well. And I guess the reason why I think it's an interesting thing to think about is, in my opinion, even if we had all the budget in the world to put into arts ministry, I wouldn't think that we would hire musicians to play. And I think it comes back to that idea of friendship that all of our ministry is based off, and the idea of being friends and being a family together and serving each other in those kind of ways, and the idea that we're not striving for professionalism, we're striving for community. And yeah, I guess that being the center of how we're moving forward in ministry is, first of all, being friends and we're still striving to do a great job and love and serve the people around us in that way, but that in a family capacity and a friendship capacity, rather than, okay, what is just the best product we can present.
That speaks to that individual element that we've talked about even on the last episode. Because also I think it would show what the leadership of the church values if you choose to pay for something, or you want to raise up leaders to do it. And actually it's a difference between serving and productizing almost, isn't it? So do you have anything on that too?
Yeah, I think I see the people who are up the front, who are leading us in music, as part of the congregation. And so I think it is a bit performative to have professional musicians who are forming that role, because I think it also could be argued that as a congregation we're all part of the band in a way, because we're all singing together.
Yeah, and it's the difference between a performance and leading music, because leading music isn't a performance. We're not playing something to be entertaining. Instead, you're leading the congregation in singing. It's the same thing with preaching. You're not preaching to be entertaining, though you can be entertaining. I've had...
but it's not the priority.
But it's not the priority. The priority is teaching and leading from God's word. And a majority of the service, it's like the person who comes up and prays is praying on behalf of the entire congregation. It's something that we're doing together. Church is something that we're all partaking in and making happen in that kind of way. And I guess that's the difference. That's a fun thing that I get to explore a lot with people who are doing church music for maybe they've just started doing it, is that transition from most musical spaces that you're playing for other people are a performance, or it's entertainment, or it's maybe you're playing in the school band or something like that. But that's all performative. And what's the difference between performing a piece of music for other people and leading people in singing? And that is kind of a mindset shift that's really, really different, but also helpful when you're thinking about making decisions. Because strategically, when I'm band leading and making musical decisions, I could make lots of musical decisions that would A, make it more entertaining for me to play, or B, make it maybe more interesting or entertaining for either me to play or to listen to. But I'm not doing it for that reason. I'm doing it to lead people to sing and to encourage them to do that. And therefore, the framework that I'm existing in is different. And so the decisions I'll make are to that end rather than the other end. And I think that's a different kind of mindset that you have in church music.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because it's not like, I don't know if you do that anywhere else.
Yeah, you don't.
You don't lead people in singing unless maybe the head of the supporters group.
Yeah, maybe some pub choir or something.
Yeah. But even then, pub choirs I usually feel like they're performing as well. There isn't, and that's again, church is about being collective and expressing what Jesus has done for us.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to have a sacrificial leadership idea of like, I'm going to lead. The intention is to lead the congregation rather than perform. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that before. But maybe, do you think that's why it's hard to make that shift in mindset? Yeah,
I think that's always the balance that you're existing in when you're playing up the front. This key for this song might make my voice sound better because it's a better register for me singing. But is it a good key for the congregation to actually sing? This line that I could play on electric guitar is going to be really fun for me to play or show off. But is it actually just distracting from what we're trying to do? And I think that's a big one with electric guitar. It's just like people just love putting in all kinds of things, and you just have to sit there and go, well, is this performative and therefore fun? Is it just more fun for me, or is it actually helping people sing and connect to the lyrics on the screen, but also just like sing without being distracted by things? And like there's times for both, but I think it is really a different mindset to performing in any kind of other capacity that most people do. And I think that's the difference between, like, you could be someone who plays music for a living, like is the most competent in terms of musical ability ever, but step into a church context and competency in that kind of way might not actually be the most helpful thing for that situation.
Yeah, it's really interesting and very countercultural, something we've been just talking about on Chip Lunch, you and me, and along with Hudson, of that some of the things we do at church are considered very countercultural because our wider culture is so individualized. So for someone to come into that, and I suppose that's the element of, is playing music a product, or is it a way of leading the gathering? So how does that work with the paid musicians? Are they just touring around on the weekend, going to different churches because they get paid to do that?
It would be like a nine, your regular gig. Like, cool. Like, I'm a session musician, and on a Sunday I get paid by this church to play here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And some of them would be Christian, some of them wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Would they go to those churches?
No. Well, yeah. Again, some of them would be Christian and some of them wouldn't be.
Probably not something that happens as much in Australia.
No, we're much smaller in that kind of way.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to another element of our strategy, which is intergenerational. All of our gatherings are intergenerational, all age, all stage, as we like to say. Stu, do you mind if you go first on this? How do you think that applies to arts and word, ministry, tech, and I always get them mixed up. What am I missing? Music, word, and tech.
Yeah, well, I think part of our framework is that triangle we've talked about a few times where we sit under the authority of God's word. We take some elements that are traditional, and we also have some elements that are more in the cultural context of today, and we make a decision about what we keep from tradition and what cultural context we embrace based on the authority of God's word. So we like to have a constant conversation about culture, and music becomes part of that as well, I suppose, and the way we do church. But with our church services, because we're Anglican, we're rooted in our liturgy as an Anglican church, and that fulfills the function of the traditional aspect of what we carry forward. And we're in a conversation together in our church, but also with our bishop about how we keep using our liturgy, not only now, but also across the city, because we have nuances in our different gatherings. We have 5 campuses, and each campus does this a little bit differently, but each hold to the liturgical tradition of the Sydney Anglican confessions and creeds and the corporate prayers. So, our Book of Common Prayer gives us a way to connect our theology with our strategy. And our strategy as Anglicans is to see things like worship as not as a spontaneous emotion only, but it's also a reverent formation. So what we mean by that is that, yes, I can have music that stirs me and I can feel great deal of emotion towards God as I'm singing, but that's not all singing is. Same with prayer and Bible reading and all the rest of the service. There is actually a reverent formation taking place by me going through a liturgical pattern that is common each week. So there are some people who say that it's not very spiritual to have things that are planned, and some people say it's not very spiritual to have things that are just spontaneous. But I think if you look at spiritual formation, there are spontaneous aspects to our spiritual formation, and there are reverent formation aspects that are more structured. So having a structured service for an hour, we really try and stick to an hour and not blow that time out too much, although my preaching tends to move towards 30 plus minutes rather than under. However, what we're doing each week is we're making sure we've got these key elements, and that actually gives us an intergenerational aspect, because we're actually listening to words that have been spoken 400 years ago. So there's this beautiful reverence that comes from that, and it helps to form us too in our context, because in Sydney we live in quite a consumeristic, materialistic part of the world, which is fairly peaceful. But to listen to words and prayers that come from the Bible, that are written down by people who are suffering under persecution, for example, gives just a depth and an insight that we don't get generationally in our generation. We're obviously going to break this down in a minute to include how do we get all the different ages within our church in a service to be working intergenerationally. And there's a little bit to that, but it starts with that tradition, I think, for us. So the Bible and that tradition is really helpful, because what we do in the service is we begin by confessing our sin. We affirm the truth of the gospel each week, and what we're actually doing each week is rejoicing in the grace of God in his forgiveness to us through Jesus Christ and the atoning sacrifice he's had on the cross. So that centers us really nicely each week with creeds and responses. In the Anglican prayer book, there's a lot of participation by the congregation. And so when we do say creeds out loud, or we say prayers out loud, and there's a call and response that we don't tend to do as often in our gatherings, because some of those elements are seen by younger generations as a bit foreign. So we use those, but not every week in all contexts. But the idea of those is to be intergenerational, because what that means is that people of all ages can actually express their faith as individuals, part of the group across the generations, and that generational context is connected to our global fellowship and also through our fellowship through history. So I think the elements for intergenerationality need to be that the gospel is really clearly presented, it's integrated smoothly, and treated with reverence as well as joy. But having said that, we talk about sober joy in our services because we like to have fun in terms of being excited about what God has given us in our Christian family. So we do have moments, say, for example, in the announcements where we might have some fun or whatever in those kind of contexts too. So we have this kind of move from confession to singing and thanking God. And then after we sing, we tend to have an announcement, building off a joyful moment, and then have another moment of reverence as we come to pray and then read the Bible and then hear the message. And then that leads us to a joyful expression at the end. So having that liturgy and a structure, I think, is really helpful so that we're actually also going to be bringing up even if we do new things, our young people are going to be brought up in that tradition, which I think, and interestingly, younger Christians and younger people are becoming more and more connected to tradition and really wanting it, because I think in postmodernism it's become so eclectic and there isn't any definite meaning in things, and there's no, everyone just does whatever they want. I think people are really yearning for a hearkening back to something solid and wholesome, actually. So, I think that's the first step. The second part is something we can riff off, but how do we bring young people into that context? So some churches with an inclusive congregational approach bring children into the whole service, and the whole service is aimed at young people and adults, and so that's called an inclusive congregational. A preparatory approach to the service would be have the children not actually come to the service at all, really, but do a separate kids' church or a separate Sunday school, as it used to be called, while the adults are meeting. There are ideas that with Christian children, because they're being brought up in a Christian context, a missional approach to church would be, don't worry about running any activities for the kids at all, just let the parents bring them up and go out and do church with kids incarnationally at the skate park. So don't even do a combined church service. And the fourth approach to church with intergenerationality is to have a strategic approach, which says that the culture between young people and old people is so foreign that you need at least separate services for them so that they have different styles of music, but eventually even having separate churches for each new generation, because the generations short of a revival can't actually culturally connect with each other anymore in our world. So just to repeat those, inclusive congregational, the kids come into the whole service. Preparatory, they don't come into the service at all. Missional, you actually don't do a service for kids in the church at all, whether it be Sunday school or bring them into the church. You actually go to the skate park and do church with them in their space. Or strategic approach, which is at least have separate church services called the homogeneous unit principle, which is most common in Sydney, but then also plant out new congregations for the kids as they grow older. They just start new churches. Soul Revival is different to all of those, and we would call it a moderate intergenerational approach. So what we do have is aspects for people to come together and aspects for people to do things separately in their generations as well. And what that allows is what we call a top-down and a bottom-up approach to intergenerationality. So instead of the older people just giving the tradition to the young people and say, keep doing this the same in each generation, they bring the tradition, but also give young people in their youth group or their kids space an opportunity to work out together expressions that are relevant for their generation. And that, I think, is helpful because it fits the triangle. So doing that underneath the Bible, older people bring the traditions of the Anglican prayer book in our context and the traditions of Soul Revival Church, which has been around for 30 years now. But then there's a conversation between the young people and the old people. So what we call our approach is a moderate intergenerational approach, which is both bottom up and top down, not one or the other.
And that kind of highlights, a great story about that in terms of evolving music was when you talked about how during the Jesus Revolution in the 60s, they moved the music out of the church because they didn't want to be in it. And then they brought it back in when they kind of came back to church. And there was a real debate about should we have drums in church.
That's
and
right.
things, and rock
That's
and
right.
roll.
Well, that's what divided the generations in the 60s, because the young people like rock and roll, and some of the older people thought that was of the devil. So how do you have a church with rock and roll? Well, the compromise in the 70s was, well, let's have an evening service with drums and guitars, and have the morning service with the organ and the hymns and the tradition. So the evening service had no tradition, and the morning service had, well, it did have a structure in Anglican churches of the prayer book still, but there was the change in music. And what we're trying to, and you know, one of the approaches with intergenerational ministry that's trendy in Sydney at the moment is to do things like, we'll bring the kids into church to sing, and then they go and do their own thing or whatever, and that's intergenerational. But Tim's approach is a bit more thought through than that, because he says just because you get people on the bus doesn't mean they're doing something. So actually getting young people participating means that we have an array of things. So really briefly, we would approach, say, our Sunday morning service as we have a formal time of an hour, but we also have a breakfast and morning tea after that. And so there's this big intergenerational aspect during breakfast and then during morning tea. We do have a thing called kids teaching time and chill time during the service. But we also have, for our year 5 and 6s, on Friday night, they have their own service with the teenagers and parents and adults. So it's still intergenerational, but it's more tilted towards the bottom up than the top down on Friday, whereas Sunday morning's more top down than bottom up. But what we do is we give the kids an opportunity in year 5 and 6 to experiment with what church is like for them, and then come to church on Sunday morning. Now, when kids graduate in year 7, we have them graduate into the church service on Sunday morning, and they help out as leaders with the kids group sometimes as well. So there's that aspect. But also, once a year for a month in January, we have the kids in the service for the whole time. So they do get to experience the church as it is for the whole time for a month. And the reason we don't do it every week is because we want to give them that bottom-up as well as top-down context. And we also want to give an opportunity for kids that are a bit busy to be able to have some time where they don't have to just sit quietly for a whole hour as well. Because we've found that some parents don't bring their kids to church if they can't sit still, and they get quite embarrassed if their kids come in. They don't need to be, because we're quite happy with kids being busy in the church service, but that's something we've just identified as a pastoral care element to the intergenerational approach that some people haven't really thought through, because there's this one size fits all to kids, even kids that may be neurodivergent. Throw them all into the service for the singing. Well, that doesn't always work for all kids, so we're kind of sensitive to that. But once a year for a month, we have the January period with no kids teaching time and no kids chill, and the kids are with us for the whole service. We also have a week away where we're all together. We also have the kids experiencing Easter and Christmas. And then when they hit year 5 and 6, then they're in a regular service on a Friday night as well as the Sunday kids teaching time. So Tim has developed something that's a bit more nuanced, and it gives young people an opportunity to serve in the body of Christ as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that really helps with an intergenerational service. So some of our listeners might have thought that was a lot in just a short amount of time. Maybe we can come back to how we do into maybe moderate intergenerationalism down the track again. But that's also part of the content of my PhD. So I think the more I get that researched out, that'll be helpful for listeners as well. I don't know if you have anything to add to all that, mate.
I just think we've talked a bit. You've talked a lot about the idea of like bottom up and top down, and it's one of those things that's one of the greatest joys I think in my ministry that I get to experience is people coming with tradition, usually older people coming with tradition, younger people coming with their cultural context, and both of them going, this is really important to me, but Jesus is more important. And so I'm happy to shake hands and meet in the middle and see how we go and glorify Jesus through doing that. And you just like, you think about I'm sure there's plenty of stories you can think about people doing that, but I just think in ministry that is one of the biggest joys, is seeing people happy to be a little bit uncomfortable because they love Jesus and that means that they get to experience a deeper relationship with one another that's not based on tradition. It is based on, but it's not based on preference. It's based on love. And I think that's something that when you get to experience things like that, it's really special because it really glorifies the relationship and the new life that we have in Jesus and the idea of living a living sacrifice and giving yourself up for one another. And I think that's a really special thing that we get to experience in intergenerational ministry is people doing that. I think it works both ways. And it's really cool to get to see young people really appreciate and love traditional elements, and also older crew who are so stoked when they see younger crew step up and also bring their cultural context into what's been going on. And I think that's something really special that we get to experience together.
I was just thinking about, you were talking about the kids ministry, is that we don't just invite them into our space, we go into their space.
That's right.
As well, with the kids.
Which I didn't say earlier, but we invite the kids teaching team to do the teaching, but we also ask all the safe adults to do safe ministry and then go and do once a term in the kids ministry. And so that gives them an opportunity to build a bit more of a relationship, so that when they see them at breakfast, like, oh, how did you go last week with that exam we prayed about last Kids Chill, or things like that.
An example of that is Fee, who's been on this podcast before, was talking to my son about 1 Kings, and Fee's in our community group. So Leo specifically read a section of 1 Kings because he was waiting for Fee to turn up to talk to her about it. And I was just like, that was just so, warms my heart when I see stuff like that. It's just lovely.
I think what's great about moderate intergenerational ministry is it doesn't assume those things will just happen. I think in a lot of churches we just hope that'll happen. We create a space and there's everyone there and we hope that the connections will happen. But sometimes I think we need to just be a little bit thought through. And it comes back to that reverent formation as well as spontaneous. I think a lot of us in the Anglican congregation just hope that relationships will happen spontaneously. But the downside of that, or the shadow of that, can sometimes be that people only make relationships with people who are like them, so the same age, same interests, things like that. But when you create spaces like Kids Chill, you're actually bringing adults into a kids space where on Saturday nights, our Kids Chill time is not the adults coming to bring an activity. It's actually saying to the kids, what do you want to do? So most weeks there's things like, oh, let's play handball. So the kids go play handball with the adults. And I love coming out of church seeing a whole heap of kids and adults playing handball together, because the adults remember what it was like to be in primary and high school when they were getting to school early to try and get ace square before all the other kids got there, and to use their ball because their ball was the best, stuff like that, which is really fun. But I love, Brayden, how you've been developing the youth band, because we've got this idea that the committed Christian teenagers on Friday night, the commitments, they can have what we call a light leadership role in the gathering on Sunday morning or Saturday night or whenever it happens to be. And so one of the aspects that I've been trying to do on Saturday night is to get the teenagers who are committed Christians and in the Light Leader program to have roles on Saturday night behind the desk and all different things, welcoming, hospitality, and in music, which we'll get you to talk about in a sec. But one of the other things I do is to get the teenagers to hand out communion.
Yeah, they do.
And it's quite powerful to have young Christians handing out communion to older Christians rather than just the other way around. And sometimes we'll have a warden or two who will jump up, but most times I just need to say, can some of you crew jump up? And there's about 15 or 20 Christian teenagers on a Saturday night who are all really growing as Christians and doing their best to live a godly life. And I think it's that beautiful idea of don't let older people look down on you because you're young, but set a standard in your life to show people how you can live a holy life too. And a number of people have commented, wow, seeing young people give out communion, which is a traditional, beautiful, probably the oldest traditional element of our service that Jesus himself instituted, and seeing young people perform that function of handing it out under my authority as a senior pastor. But yeah, it's really beautiful to watch that. But the music was the same the other night. We had the youth band up. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So something cool that we've been able to build over the last couple of years is, as Stu mentioned, on a Friday night, I have a space in the Friday night gathering, which is an intergenerational gathering, but to also be like give an opportunity for young crew to step into that as part of that gathering, because it's their gathering. Like as much fun as I have and Eth has, getting to head that up and lead it. It's really their gathering, and so it's what they make of it, and what has been a really fun thing over, especially doing that over a number of years now, is the young crew stepping into that, and just getting to kind of like experience and help figure out what it means to serve in that way, and also just in an environment that's a little bit less kind of foreign, because it's Friday and it's in front of a lot of their friends there, because it's in between youth and Fuse, and just having that environment where we can spend a little bit of extra time training them in that, and then getting to develop that to then step into our other gatherings has been something just something I've been really privileged to be a part of over the last couple of years. And so on the fifth Saturday if there is a fifth Saturday in a month, the youth band's on. And that's kind of the way that we've structured over the last little bit. And that previously over the last couple of times has been me band leading and stepping in with a bunch of the young crew playing, which has been really, really fun. It's been really great to get crew across gatherings as well. So a couple of our crew from Miranda have jumped in. A bunch of crew who usually go to Saturday or Sunday have jumped in, which has really been really fun, and we've done that over the last couple of years. But then this Saturday was the first time that they led that. So Tobias band led, picked the songs, organised practice. I came along for practice, just mainly for emotional support and moral support. Yeah, it was just really cool to see them step up and have that responsibility, and also step up and lead the congregation in that way on a Saturday. So that was the first time that they had led in that way. They've played in lots of different contexts. They've played band nights. They've played with me leading. But yeah, it was a really special thing to have young crew who we've worked with over a number of years, serving in lots of different capacities, step up and do that. And there's been lots of, and it's not just music ministry. We have lots of teenagers who are on the Proclaim roster who are helping out with sound. Micaiah led the service on a Sunday morning a couple of month ago-ish.
And how old's Micaiah?
Micaiah is 16 or 17.
16, I think.
Yeah, somewhere around there, which is really special. Amos has prayed up the
He
front.
does so
Vinny
well.
Bubble Reed. There's a bunch
Pramos.
of they call
him Pramos.
Pramos is a, and I guess what's really special is getting to be a part of them stepping up, taking ownership and serving in their gathering, and they've started doing that on Friday. Lots of different faces of lead the service on Friday. Ted led last week. Zach Simons, Lucy's led before. And it's really fun to get to see them take ownership over something, really feel like this is their space, and not just this is our space because it's a youth service. This is our space on Saturday. This is our space on Sunday. This is our space on Friday. And it's been really special to get to do that. And yeah, Saturday was kind of a really fun example of young crew leading us in that way. And it's really, really fun. And I think what's also been great is those crew don't just exist in the youth band. They're not just kind of like, okay, this is your playpen you can play in, but don't touch our other stuff. They're spread throughout. A number of them are now in the regular roster across all the bands, which is really, really lovely.
So that's an example of top down and bottom up, not just one or the other. So if they were just in the band, that'd be a bottom up. But if they were only allowed to be in adult bands as well, that's top down.
Exactly.
That's a nice mix you've achieved there.
Yeah, we don't just have them existing in the youth band space only bottom up, and we don't just have, okay, we're adults in charge, you're now in these bands and we're telling you how to do it top down. Instead, we're getting to have both, which is, I'm really enjoying getting to see how God's been working through those ministries over the last couple of years, actually.
Part of some good feedback I've heard from that is there's just a couple of adults that are interested in doing electronic music in music, and some of the younger kids are, of course, real excited about doing that. So seeing them talk to each other about that really excites me, that they might be able to pull off some more cool electronic sounds in the singing as well.
It's similar to you were saying that people like seeing the young people help with communion. It's a similar thing of them seeing them lead, but it's also capturing that thing we talked about at the start of the episode about leading, not performing, and to see the young people do that, other people in the church respond to that, I think. And I think that's what's really, really special about it. And also a testament to your leadership, Brayden, over the last few years, especially as arts pastor, to get a band up. How many people were in that band? I think there was
like polyphonic spree. There's like 100.
There was quite a few, wasn't there? It's probably like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
They're all playing together and they worked it out together. I think that was really cool.
Yeah. But I think that's also a testament. Like we've been talking a lot about the intergenerational aspect of our strategy, but we're also long-term, low-key. And having that been, I don't even know, when did I start college? Like having Stu trusting me as a younger person. I don't even know how old was I when I started leading the Friday gathering. 25. And I think a lot of senior ministers wouldn't be like, "Here you go, figure it out." And Stu is obviously there whenever I needed and has had great input into Friday, but it's also been like, "Here you go, like let's do this together and let's figure it out." And that has meant long term that I've been able to exist in that system that in a low key way has raised up this crew to then have them serving in that capacity. And I think that's a great, like we're talking top down, bottom up in terms of the teenagers. I'm also talking top down, bottom up in terms of the leadership aspect of church leadership, the gathering, and then those relationships between generations. It's not just teenagers and everyone else, which I think is something really special to be a part of.
And that's the shock absorber. You've got the flexibility of youth and the wisdom of age, which can provide some strength and continuity, and all of that under the authority of God's word.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I think it's a really good point. And the fact that you guys are very aligned on the strategy as well really helps as well, which is why we talk so much about strategy is often the missing piece that churches skip over, and I think it's a really key part to look at.
Could I just say something on that? I think that's a really interesting point because in other staff teams, I mean, there hasn't even been theological alignment, and so sometimes the staff are actually arguing about theology, but definitely arguing about different strategies.
Yeah.
Not always in a heated way, but sometimes. And sometimes there's a breakdown in relationship based on theological difference or strategic difference. So it is a really big blessing that we have in our team. Not that we're perfect, but we get on pretty well because we're not arguing about theology and strategy, and we're able to just talk about our practice, and that does help with unity in the team.
Yeah, I think that's a spot on. Can I talk about or ask you about team structure?
Yeah.
Because that's another often debated way of doing, like, how do you do your music ministry, for example? What are kind of our principles of team structure? I mean, one of the things I really love about our strategy is that we don't do a ministry unless it's as a team.
Yeah.
And that's for a variety of different reasons, but also just that we're able to support each other. And it's from so many lessons that we've learned through youth ministry. How do we want to... We're a growing church as well, so we have to be ready to scale up as well. But how do we look at the structure of our arts teams?
Yeah, and I think that has changed over time. I've been full time as the arts minister for just probably just over a year at this point. So our arts ministry has existed a long time before I stepped into that role, and that has been a great blessing across a number of people looking after. I think was Jared the first central coordinator of arts?
He established
Jared
it.
And Nick and Kath have been faithfully serving in that role for a long time as well, which is amazing to get to. I'm very aware that I am standing on the shoulders of others in the position that I'm in, and it's fun to get to, as you mentioned, Joel, figure out what does arts ministry look like at Soul Revival with, I don't know, how many people do we have now?
About 950 people.
Yeah, and that is obviously a very different undertaking than it was when what does arts look like with 30 people in a lounge room.
That's true.
Yeah, so I'm aware that it's kind of changed those roles over time, and with growing, God blessing us with growth, it means growing structures. And so I have a number of gathering coordinators that look after that. I have central coordinators, Nick and Kath, who are helping me oversee the entire thing. And I think it's structured similarly to lots of the groups across Soul Revival in terms of we have pastor looking after that team with the central coordinators. We have gathering coordinators looking after each particular gathering. I have band leaders, which is kind of if you have a team leader kind of role, or if you were looking across to hospitality, that would be your like
a
dinner leader, like dinner team leader, the person who's leading that team. And then I have band members under that, just like members of the ministry in that kind of way, and that moves across in terms of arts and therefore tech and proclaim, things like that. And I think it is helpful to have it structured that way. It means it aligns with youth ministry, it aligns with kids ministry, it aligns with hospitality and a number of the different things that we're working towards, I think, across lots of our service teams. And I think, like you mentioned, Joel, the most important thing is that we're doing it as a team. And so it's not just one particular person's vision or things moving forward of how things should be, but instead it's a volunteer organization that's doing it together because we love Jesus, which is a really cool thing to be a part of. And that's kind of circling back to where we were talking about at the start, why we do it in the way that we do it in a volunteer capacity. I'm trying to think of where else to touch on in terms of the actual structure of things.
Well, that's the actual, I mean, maybe we could ask Stu, like you've seen it change over time, but that's the point of having our ministry framework, is to be able to scale it as God grows the different ministries underneath it. So you've seen it change a lot over the years.
Well, we've had the benefit of being able to expand from a small base and then continue on the same ethos as we've expanded, which is taking our DNA as a founder principle, it's called, and then exporting that to each of the different areas of the church. In a multi-site church context, if the church that is planted by the mother church, so to speak, seeks to have the same DNA as the mother church, then that works well in a multi-site context. However, if the daughter church wants a different DNA, then it's best if that's a mother-daughter church plant and they go off and do their own thing. We're always open to, if any of our campuses or locations, we call them, would like to do their own thing. It'd be up to them as a church if they ever want to say that. But there's a mutuality in doing it together, which we find really encouraging both ways. We're not just pragmatic. We're not just doing things for efficiency, which some strategies do aim for. So in some models, the idea is to have uniformity across the board and doing the same thing. We seek to institutionalize relationships rather than structures and principles, so that it's less likely to go out of date that way. So we become less likely to become institutionalized. So you do get different practical nuances in different gatherings at Soul Revival, but with the same theology and the same strategy. So we can talk about that a bit more next week. But we started with the sense that we're one team. The whole of the Soul Revival commitments, or the committed Christians, are all one team. And then we've all, for the sake of the structure, broken that up into 10 teams, which is 5 more than the standard 5Ms approach, for example, which many churches do, which is another approach to strategy on how you do structure. But the 5Ms, as I understand it, is more focused on having the paid pastoral staff overseeing 5 different ministry areas. I'm sorry if I've sold that short, because I'm not an expert on that model and I haven't been trained in it. But we've gone for 10 because we actually want to try and get volunteers to oversee those 10 service teams. And we think that 5 is a bit much for a volunteer to oversee. So we've broken our service teams into 10. The arts team has subsections. So the 10 teams are all one team, and then each team is one team within that. And what we've been able to achieve is we're saying that we're friends with Jesus and we're friends with each other in the team, and we explicitly encourage people to think of John 15:15, that I no longer call you servants but friends. And we think that just running a roster is a bit like being a servant. You don't really know the master's idea of what you're doing. You're just fulfilling a function as a guitar player on this particular service for this particular night. Whereas we're saying, well, if we've got relationships with each other in the arts team, we're all friends. And that makes a lot of difference. It's really good because there's more pastoral care, there's more discipleship. And funnily enough, there's more mission because people actually who know other friends who are interested in music can introduce their musical friends to other Christians in the church that are musical as well, for example. So we do that. So we have that philosophy at the bedrock of it. But then we're also open to be friends based on being Christian, not special interests. So it's not just the musos are all friends and the tech guys and ladies are all friends. It's actually we're all one team. So the friendship idea breaks down that siloing of tech and music, for example, or tech and the proclaim ministry. Or prayers and readers and preachers. Like we actually bring the preachers and the readers and the prayers and musicians all in the one team for a training day once a year, for example. So that friendship group's really important. But then how we run that is we have a really cool multi-site model that we've taken on board from the Americans that Geneva helped us to discover through Scott when we first started, which is to have central coordinators of those 10 service teams and then a gathering coordinator in each gathering. So what we end up with is 7 gatherings at Soul Revival with one central coordinator and an arts pastor who's also a gathering pastor. So in our model, we don't just have people in charge of arts. Every pastor is a generalist and a specialist, and they work with a volunteer in that so that the idea is to have volunteer pastors in the gatherings with the paid staff and also to have volunteer coordinators in a service team with a paid staff member. And that seems to work really well. So, and that's expandable exponentially, actually, I think. Well, I don't know yet, but I think it can go bigger than what we are. And I have heard rumours that there are churches in America, like in Chicago, that are running 20 campuses or something based on that sort of model. But the idea is there's a matrix then. So you've got your gathering pastor, but you've also got your service team pastor. You've got people that are responsible for, in our case, arts on the Saturday night service with band leaders that are like we call team leaders. So we have a coordinator, gathering coordinator of arts on Saturday, and then team leaders. The team leaders are band leaders that look after their individual bands, of which I think are 2 or
they're kind of mixed
Saturday?
up at the moment.
Mixed up a bit.
We've mixed. We've gone back and forward with having set bands and having less set bands, which is I think a fun part of experimenting that together is that we can kind of move forward and move back.
Yeah, that's iterative design too, which is what we talk about on the podcast. Try something, see if it works.
See how it goes.
But anyway, so the idea is with the structure, it's quite easy to think about when you think about 10 teams. Each of them have a pastor, each of them have a coordinator who's central. So that's called our executive team. Our executive team runs the church with the pastors, the central coordinators and the parish council. And then we have a full council that includes all the gathering pastors for all 10 service teams in all 7 groups. So we have 70 coordinators at Soli's now. When we started off with just 4 central coordinators and 2 pastors. So that having that kind of idea of a trellis, as those of you who've heard the podcast we've talked about with the trellis and the vine, the idea is that the people ministry is like a vine that's growing up on the structures or the trellis of the church. And so we've tried to develop a trellis that's a lot bigger than what we need, but it's like IKEA, we keep putting the extra bits on it as the vine grows rather than having this humongous trellis that kills the vine. It's actually kind of an IKEA trellis.
Yeah, that's a funny way to describe it. So in that respect, like in terms of ministry capacity, someone might hear this and say, oh, that's so many people. We don't have the ability of that. Yeah. My question, I suppose, is like, do you have to have music at every gathering? We have a gathering that currently doesn't have music. What would be the response to someone asking about that? It's like, well, how do I build my music ministry to have these coordinators and central coordinators, et cetera, and we don't even have music, for example, at Yarrawonga. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think the blessing that we have in the way that we think that Stu's framework has developed around church is that we are set up to have gatherings of different sizes. I'm sure on Shock Absorb we've talked about Vespers, Beatles, and combis before, and it's that idea of thinking through what church is, and that different sizes of church look different and function different, and that's okay. And church isn't just one thing that exists that way and is successful if it is that thing. And I think that's a really helpful way of thinking about church planning and size and scale. As you mentioned, Yarra Warra is currently at that Vesper size, which Ride was, Friday was, Saturday was, like there's been...
Sunday was
like... and things have moved out of that, back to that. And the Vesper idea is just the idea that you don't need every 10 service team coordinators set and ready and this many people and a pastor and anything to start a church plant. There's somewhere else where we can start. And I think the exciting thing with Yarra Warra is we didn't have anyone to do music at Yarra Warra. So, thinking through what does that look like for a church service to not have music and present in that way. And I think the exciting thing about what Yarra Warra has been able to do is step out of that and be extremely missional in what it's been able to do. Amazingly missional, actually, the way that God has used those people in that place. So Yarra Warra is church in a car park. Being able to not have music has meant that it's been able to be outside, which has meant it's more visible, which has meant that a lot more people have visited and stuck around. And it looks different to the other gatherings, and that is amazing in my opinion. And I think it also just frees the expectation of, well, what is a successful church gathering? Is it only successful if it's this or that, or tick this box or tick that box? Instead, well, it's successful because we're doing it together. That is a successful gathering.
I feel like some Christians would say if we can't have music, we should just shut it down, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the case, because again, this ministry framework allows it to be scale up or down if that's what's required. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so instead of burning people out doing too many things, the idea is that we don't have any musos at Yarra Warra, or we don't have to have music. We do have to have the Word of God. We do have to have a sermon, and we do have to pray. And I think those things are super crucial. And with the singing element, it's debatable whether you need to have singing or not in a service. Christians debate that. But the actual form of the Vesper in our mind is in between a Bible study and a church service. So we think there's two options for a Bible study growing. Either you butt it when it gets to 15 or 20 people into two Bible studies, or you actually say, let's keep going. Let's see if this could become a new church. So in our model, we would possibly be open to a Bible study that's growing rapidly to turn it into another gathering. And so there's a step between viability of a Bible study and viability of a service, and to take the pressure off people. We don't expect them to have all the bells and whistles of a formal service as a Vesper, but they're building towards that aspirationally. So we have a system that allows a pathway from a Bible study size group to a gathering, and that's not part of any other multi-church structures, because mostly I think the Americans say you can't plant a new church unless you have 50 people, a paid pastor, a place to meet. I think there's 5 other things, logistics, la, la, la. But in a multi-site church, we've planted churches from as small as 2 people, because Grace and Michelle started Ride together, and then they got a group of 6 friends, and then those 6 friends got that going, and then so on and so on. And it's still, in its preliminary stages, but it's moved from a Vesper to a Beetle, because now they've got 40 people in the church, and they've got regular attendances of around 30, something like that, and they've got enough to have music and hospitality and all those different elements to it. And so they've built into that. And we actually think with our 10 service teams, each of those are paired, so we can have them in ministry pairs. So we've put welcoming and world ministry, for example, into a ministry pair. So that only needs 1 central coordinator. So the way to go from 0 to 10 is to go from 0 to 5. And then when you go from get those 5 coordinators, then they can have a partner helping them with those 2, and then you bud those to create 10. And then once that's taken place, you've got 10 people working together as a team who are all asking other committed Christians to join their team as leaders and eventually team leaders. And then that's how it actually organically grows like that, like we think Christianity at its heart is a grassroots movement. And as a movement, it's helpful to have some institutions and institutional structures, but we try and actually work out how do we actually help to form a group of Christians into the body of Christ with Christ as the head, so that they can all be using their giftedness for the building up of the body. And you can do that in a small way or a medium-sized way or a big way. When a medium-sized church starts getting even stronger and more numbers, around 100, then we call that a combi. And it's a kind of fun thing, because when you first start out driving, sometimes people start with just something to get them around, whether it be a push bike or a Vespa. Can't really do much with other people, but when you want something for your friends and you got your license, you get a little car. You don't usually get a family car, but then, when you got heaps of kids and bikes and cots and all those things you need for a family, you need a bigger car. And that's where we've gone for those fun old school archetypal cars to represent that. But most people get that picture and they go, oh yeah, I don't need a combi when I first start driving, although I did, because I loved combis. That was my second car, I think. Yeah. But it was good for a surfboard. But the thing about bigger cars is you usually do it as you need a bigger structure as the group of people grows. So we're trying to reflect that vine and the trellis, but just with a different metaphor. So we use the cars as a metaphor. But then if the church shrinks for whatever reason, which has taken place at Yarrawarra, we were a Beetle. We were big enough for a formal service, but we didn't have the numbers to be able to pull off music. So we decided to bring it back to its core. And that means it's a sustainable ministry capacity for a small group of people to still have church together and be on mission together. And so we focus in our practice, which we'll talk about next week, on discipleship and mission and resourcing. And so, just having a realistic expectation of the resources takes the pressure off and people don't burn out.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Well, I think that's a good way to end it. Thank you very much, guys. Plenty to think about and talk about. If you do have any questions, if you're listening and watching, and thank you for doing that, you can email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au, and we can answer it on the podcast. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Brayden.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Goodbye. And thank you, Stu. It's been great. Thank you very much. Always appreciate your in-depth thinking for both of you about how you're actually running your ministry, and I think it's really valuable for other people to hear it. So thank you very much.
Cool.
No worries. We'll finish with a one-word.
One-word.